It was a Tuesday, quiet, uneventful, the kind of day that felt safe. The house was still. I'd tucked myself under a soft blanket on the couch, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the ticking of the old grandfather clock keeping me company. The air had that early October chill, just enough to make the windows fog slightly. I remember thinking how peaceful it all felt. A woman in her own home, married 15 years, certain she knew her life. Gary was in Las Vegas for his annual sales conference. Industrial parts, ball bearings, things so unglamorous they almost felt wholesome. Every year he'd say the same thing. "You'd hate it, Bren. Just long meetings and bad steak dinners." I'd smile, kiss his cheek, and tell him to have fun. It had become our rhythm. He'd get a few days of bachelor freedom. I'd get a few nights of silence. We both pretended that was balance. That night, I'd texted him a picture of the backyard the maple tree had turned the color of wine. "Hope your seminars aren't too boring," I'd written. No reply, but that wasn't unusual. Gary could ignore a message for hours, then call later with some lazy apology and a joke to make me laugh. So when my phone buzzed in the darkness, I smiled before I even picked it up. I thought it would be him saying, "Miss you." The screen lit my face in that cold blue light and I froze. It wasn't a text. It was a photo. Gary, grinning under the neon pink glow of a Vegas wedding chapel sign. His arm wrapped tightly around a woman in a cheap white dress. A marriage certificate in her hand. And beneath it, 5 sentences that detonated my world one by one. "Just married Cheryl. Been sleeping with her for 8 months. Your boring, predictable life made this so easy. Enjoy your sad little world. You're pathetic, by the way." My breath left my body so fast it hurt. The air thickened, the room seemed to tilt, and the laughter from the TV warped into static. I stared at the photo, at the woman beside him. Cheryl, my sister. My baby sister, the one I'd taught to use eyeliner, the one whose first car I'd helped pay for. Her smile in that photo looked almost manic, like she was trying to convince herself it was joy, not guilt. Something inside me went cold. Not broken, frozen. The kind of cold that preserves you long enough to survive what's next. For a few seconds, my mind tried to explain it away. Maybe it was fake, maybe it was a joke, but I knew it wasn't. The truth had a weight to it, heavy and unmistakable, and it was crushing me in real time. I could have screamed. I could have called my mother. I could have hurled the phone across the room. But instead, I heard this voice, quiet, sharp, and unfamiliar, whisper, "Don't give them a show." They wanted drama, tears, the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. I wouldn't give them that. So I typed one word, 4 letters. "Cool." And hit send. It felt surgical, final, like closing a coffin lid. In that instant, Brenda Martin, the dependable wife, the boring spreadsheet queen, ceased to exist. Something else was born in her place. I sat very still for a while, the phone heavy in my hand, the glow fading from the screen. My eyes drifted to the mantel, the photos of us. Our wedding at the vineyard, his arm around my waist, that practiced smile, the Grand Canyon trip, the Christmas portrait with my parents. All of it was now museum glass exhibits from a life that had just died. The funny thing about betrayal is how quiet it is. There's no explosion, no soundtrack, no thunderclap announcing the end. Just a silence so complete it swallows you whole. I stood up slowly, as if the house itself might collapse if I moved too fast. In the reflection of the dark window, I saw a woman I barely recognized, calm, pale, eyes hollow but steady. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like someone who'd just seen through an illusion and decided never to look away again. I walked upstairs. The bed was still perfectly made, one side untouched. I smoothed the sheets with the back of my hand, then sat down. My mind wasn't racing anymore, it was organizing. Filing thoughts into neat boxes labeled money, locks, access, control. Gary thought he'd left me defenseless. But he'd forgotten who ran the accounts, who handled the bills, who filed the taxes, who actually built the quiet stability he thought he could destroy. He'd mistaken calm for weakness. He was about to learn the difference. I slipped my phone into the nightstand drawer. And as the clock struck 3 a.m., I whispered to the darkness, "All right, Gary, let's play." People talk about heartbreak like it's chaos, screaming, crying, throwing things. But for me, it was organization. My grief didn't explode, it systemized. At 3:05 a.m., I wasn't sobbing into a pillow. I was sitting at my desk in my home office, the one Gary called my little corner. He thought I paid bills there, maybe browsed Pinterest. He had no idea this room was where our life's entire architecture lived. Insurance policies, tax folders, passwords, investments, backups. The blue light from my monitor flickered against the dark window, and in that reflection, I looked like a ghost conducting her own autopsy. Gary had always said, "You're the organized one. I could never do what you do." He meant it as a compliment. What he didn't realize was that those skills were about to dismantle his entire existence. The first move was surgical. Step 1. Money. I logged into our credit card portal. The password? A line from Pride and Prejudice. He'd never read the book, never even noticed the framed quote I kept on the bookshelf. One click. Remove authorized user. A pop-up appeared. Are you sure this action is permanent? Yes. The next account. Remove. Confirm. Remove. Each click was a heartbeat, steady and deliberate. By the time I finished, Gary Martin's purchasing power had evaporated into digital dust. Next came the bank. Our joint account had always been my creation, opened with my inheritance, managed by me. Gary's salary went straight into it every 2 weeks, and from there, I handled everything. After he nearly lost the house once by forgetting property taxes, he'd happily handed over financial control. Now, I transferred nearly every cent to a separate high-yield savings account he didn't know existed, one I'd named, What If. I left just enough for the electric bill. $15,822. Enough to keep the lights on, not enough to fund an escape. The transfer confirmation pinged, and for the first time that night, I smiled. It wasn't joy. It was power, the quiet kind that comes when you realize the person who underestimated you just handed you the knife and turned their back. Step 2. Communication. Gary's phone was on our family plan. Under my name, naturally. I hovered over his line, imagining him somewhere in Vegas, maybe half drunk, maybe asleep beside Cheryl, his phone lighting up with messages he couldn't read. I didn't cancel his line. That would be too merciful. Instead, I reported the device as stolen. A few clicks later, his service went dark. No calls, no texts, no internet. Let him taste silence for once. Step 3. The locks. It was 3:27 a.m. when I called Liberty Locksmith. A man answered, his voice groggy and cautious. Liberty, Mike speaking. Hi, Mike. My name's Brenda Martin, I said evenly. I need all exterior locks replaced immediately. There was a pause. Ma'am, it's after 3 in the morning. Is there an emergency? Should I? No police necessary, I interrupted softly. The threat's been neutralized. I just need to make sure my home stays that way. He hesitated, then said, That's gonna be a premium call-out, 300 cash. I'll leave 400 at the door if you're here in 30 minutes. A small beat of silence, then, I'm putting on my boots. While I waited, I moved through the house like a ghost reclaiming her territory. I opened closets, drawers, cupboards, gathering Gary's things into piles. The suits, the shoes, the golf clubs, his ridiculous unopened Star Wars figurines he swore would be collector's items someday. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just moved, calm and methodical. The pile grew taller by the minute, a monument to arrogance. Every item had once carried weight. Now they looked like clutter. It was almost funny how ordinary a life can look when it's stripped of illusion. At 3:58 a.m., a white van pulled into the driveway. Mike stepped out, a broad man with tired eyes and a toolbox. He glanced at me, then at the mountain of belongings behind me, and nodded slowly. Rough night? He asked quietly. You could say that, I replied. He didn't press. He didn't need to. There was a silent understanding between us, a kind of solidarity only strangers can offer at ungodly hours. You show me the locks, ma'am. The sound of his drill echoed through the house, steady and strong. Each click was a small victory. Each were a reminder that I was rebuilding something stronger. By 5 a.m., it was done. New locks, new keys, new order. He handed me a small ring of gleaming brass keys. They're solid. Nobody's getting in unless you want them to. Perfect, I said, slipping him the cash and an extra 50. He gave me a tired but knowing smile. Stay safe, Mrs. Martin. I plan to, I said quietly. When the van disappeared down the street, the silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was earned. I stood in the hallway, surrounded by boxes and echoes of the man I used to love, and for the first time in 15 years, the house felt like it belonged to me. I turned the new deadbolt, heard it slide into place with a final metallic click, and whispered to the darkness, "Your move, Gary." Then I climbed the stairs, crawled into the cool expanse of my bed, and slept. Not peacefully, not yet, but with the stillness of someone who had taken back her name. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after a storm you've caused on purpose. When I finally fell asleep that night, it wasn't from exhaustion, it was from completion. Every click, every lock, every transfer was a stitch in a wound I refused to let bleed. But peace never lasts long when men like Gary realize they've lost control. I woke to the kind of pounding that shakes the bones of a house. Not polite, not hesitant, the authoritative kind. I blinked at the clock on my nightstand, 8:15 a.m. The sunlight sliced through the blinds, cutting my room into ribbons. For half a second, I forgot everything. Then I saw the other side of the bed empty, undisturbed, and memory came flooding back like cold water. The pounding came again. "Police! Open up!" Of course. Gary's first move had always been to play the victim. He couldn't reach me, couldn't use his cards, couldn't even unlock his phone, so he did what cowards do best. He found someone else to fight his battle. I took my time. I brushed my hair back, tied my robe, and checked my reflection in the mirror. Calm, composed, alive. Then I walked downstairs. Through the peephole, I saw two uniformed officers, one older, one young. Their cruiser idled at the curb, engine rumbling in the morning light. I opened the door just enough to stand tall behind it. "Good morning, officers," I said evenly. The older one, broad shoulders, thick mustache, eyes that had seen too many family implosions, glanced down at his notebook. "Ma'am, are you Brenda Martin?" "I am." "We received a call from your husband, Gary Martin. He says you've locked him out of his residence, changed the locks, and possibly interfered with his bank and phone accounts." He looked up from the notes. "He's at the airport, very upset." I let that hang in the air a beat, then tilted my head slightly. "My husband," I repeated, as if tasting the word. "That's interesting." The younger officer shifted awkwardly. "So he's not your husband?" "Oh, he was," I said, "until about 6 hours ago, when he married someone else." Both men froze. I picked up my phone from the hall table and turned the screen toward them, the Vegas chapel photo glowing brightly in the morning light. "Here's the proof. That's my husband. That's my sister. This message came to me at 2:47 a.m. The younger officer's eyebrows shot up. The older one squinted, leaned in, and exhaled sharply. "Well," he muttered, "I'll be damned." There was a moment of heavy silence, the kind that happens when the truth is too obvious to argue with. Finally, the older officer straightened. "Mrs. Martin, do you own this house?" "I do, solely. Bought it with my grandmother's inheritance 2 years before I married him." He nodded slowly, closing his notebook. "Then you're within your rights to change the locks." The radio on his shoulder crackled. "Unit 7, status on the Martin residence? Complainant's on the line again, he's insisting you force entry." The older cop pressed the button on his mic. "Dispatch, stand by." He turned back to me. "Ma'am," about his belongings. "Packed and waiting," I said, gesturing to the pile in the foyer. "Nothing touched that isn't his." He looked at the boxes, then at me, really looked at me. Something softened in his eyes. "Understood," he said. He keyed the mic again. "Dispatch. Advise complainant this is a civil matter. We will not be forcing entry. Also," he hesitated, glancing at the phone still in my hand, "advise that the complainant appears to have committed felony bigamy in Clark County, Nevada, approximately 6 hours ago. You can patch that to a detective if he wants to file a complaint." A hiss of static, then a man's voice, raw and unmistakable, burst through the radio. Are you kidding me? She's lying. That house is mine. She stole my money. Gary's voice. Feral, shrill, unhinged. The younger officer turned away to hide a laugh. The older one just sighed, pressing the button again. Sir, calm down. You'll need to contact an attorney. We're clearing the scene. He released the button, then turned back to me. You're going to be hearing from his lawyer, ma'am. I gave him a small smile. I'm counting on it. I already have one of my own. For a second, something like admiration flickered across his face. He nodded. Good luck to you, Mrs. Martin. Thank you, officer, I said softly. And, for what it's worth, I hope the next call you get is about someone happier. He smiled faintly. Me too. They walked back to their cruiser, boots crunching on the gravel, while I stood framed in the doorway, sunlight spilling across the floor, warming my bare feet. The radio still crackled faintly as they drove away, Gary's rage fading into static. When the car turned the corner, I closed the door. The new lock clicked home, deep and final. For a moment, I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and just breathed. Not shaking, not crying, just breathing. Round 1 was over. And I'd won. The silence that followed the police visit felt almost sacred. For the first time in years, the house was mine, quiet, safe, sealed behind new locks and thick resolve. The morning light spilled across the living room floor, painting everything in soft gold, like a benediction for survivors. I made coffee, not because I needed caffeine, but because I needed ritual. The sound of it dripping into the pot was steady, grounding. For 15 years, I'd made 2 mugs. This morning, I made one. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around the warmth, staring at the world outside my window, the same backyard I'd once imagined Gary and I growing old in. For the first time, I saw it differently. A stage set built on lies. The piece lasted exactly 2 hours. It started with the crunch of tires on gravel. Then the low rumble of an engine idling too long in the driveway. When I looked up, my stomach turned. My mother's beige Buick, the family war wagon. 4 doors opened in sequence, like a dreadful magic trick. Gary stepped out first, red-eyed and furious. Cheryl followed, smaller somehow, wrapped in a cardigan that swallowed her. Then my other sister, Janet, arms crossed, face already rehearsing disapproval. And finally, my mother, Eleanor, the general of this dysfunctional little army, clutching her handbag like a scepter. They weren't visiting, they were invading. The doorbell rang. Once, twice. Then the pounding began. Brenda, I know you're in there. Open this door right now. Her voice had that clipped authority that could still, even now, make my pulse stutter. But fear had left me somewhere around 3 a.m. last night. I slid the chain lock into place and opened the door just 3 inches. Enough to see, not enough to enter. There they were, my family, lined up on the porch like a jury. Gary's jaw was clenched so tight a vein pulsed in his temple. Cheryl's eyes darted everywhere but at me. Janet looked bored. And my mother. She wore that look she saved for PTA meetings and church gossip, polished indignation. What do you want? I asked evenly. Gary lunged forward, pushing the door until the chain caught. What do I want? I want into my house. I want my cards turned back on. What the hell is wrong with you? There's nothing wrong with me, I said calmly. But there's plenty wrong with you. My mother gasped, as if I'd used profanity. Brenda, stop this nonsense. You're embarrassing us. Whatever silly spat you and Gary are having, handle it like adults. Now unlock this door and let your husband and your sister inside. The words hit harder than I expected. Your husband and your sister. The casual cruelty of it, the way she said it like it was normal. Something cold flared up in me. He's not my husband, I said through clenched teeth. And she's not my sister, not anymore. Janet scoffed. Oh, here we go. Street Brenda the martyr. You've always loved drama. Probably drove him to it with all your rules and budgets and control freak nonsense. I'm shocked it didn't happen sooner. There it was, the familiar poison of envy, the soundtrack of my childhood. Janet, the golden one, always bitter that I had stability while she had chaos. I smiled faintly. I'd thank you for the insight, Janet, but you've never been great at recognizing stability when you see it. Her face darkened. My mother's lips tightened. Brenda, she snapped. You're making a spectacle of yourself. He made a mistake. Cheryl made a mistake. You're supposed to be the bigger person. The bigger person? I repeated quietly. You mean the obedient one? The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Then I looked past them, directly at Cheryl. She was crying now, silent, trembling tears that cut lines through her makeup. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to feel fury. But what I felt instead was something worse. Pity. You have 1 hour, I said softly. All of Gary's things are packed in the foyer. After that, I'll have them removed. Permanently. Gary's face twisted. You can't do that. I can. And I will. I stepped closer to the door, my voice low and steady. Also, you might want to think twice before showing up at my job, or trying to fix this through your company's HR department. I had a lovely chat with my lawyer this morning. She's quite interested in the fact that you and Cheryl work under the same parent company. Corporate loves enforcing their ethics and fraternization policies, especially when there's a public scandal involved. The words hit like thunder. Gary paled. Cheryl let out a strangled sob. Even my mother blinked, momentarily lost for words. That's not, Gary started, but I cut him off. One email, Gary. One. With that photo from Vegas attached. Think about it while you're loading your boxes. For a second, no one moved. Then, quietly, I closed the door. The chain clinked, the latch slid home, and I leaned against the wood, my hands trembling not from fear, but release. On the other side, voices rose and cracked, arguing, sobbing, cursing. I listened as they stumbled over themselves, dragging boxes, dropping things, fighting among each other. The sound of their chaos was almost beautiful. When the engine finally turned over and the Buick rolled down the street, the silence that followed was not emptiness. It was ownership. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't echo. It felt full of breath, of boundaries, of me. I stood in that stillness and whispered, "Goodbye, family." Then I turned away from the door, walked upstairs, and exhaled for the first time since 2:47 a.m. The house stayed quiet after they left, but it wasn't peace. It was aftermath. The air still held their voices, echoes of my mother's commands, Cheryl's sobs, Gary's fury. I moved through the rooms like someone inspecting storm damage, checking for cracks. Every corner looked the same, but nothing felt the same. That night, the silence pressed against me like a weight. I made tea, didn't drink it. Turned on the TV, didn't watch it. Everything ordinary now felt hollow, like props from a play that had ended mid-scene. For days I existed in that fog. The adrenaline that had carried me through the night of the betrayal began to fade, leaving only grief behind, slow, thick, and exhausting. I'd walk into the living room and spot one of Gary's stray socks under the couch and freeze. I'd find Cheryl's old birthday card tucked in a drawer, her bubbly handwriting spelling, "Love you forever, sis," and have to sit down just to breathe. My hands stopped doing normal things, answering calls, checking mail, paying bills. I'd stare at the ceiling for hours, feeling nothing and everything at once. The fortress I'd built so fiercely began to feel like a prison. The world outside, however, had other plans for me. It started with a notification on my phone. Facebook. Your sister Cheryl Evans has made a post. I shouldn't have opened it, but of course, I did. It was long, painfully self-pitying, the kind of message that weaponizes vulnerability. I never wanted to hurt anyone. Sometimes life takes you places you never expected. I spent years feeling invisible in my own family. Gary saw me when no one else did. Love is complicated, but it's real. I just hope one day my sister can forgive me. Below that, a photo. Her and Gary, holding hands, smiling, like they were survivors of some tragic misunderstanding, not the architects of betrayal. Within minutes, the comments poured in. Old family friends, cousins, even my aunt. You're so brave, Cheryl. People don't understand until they've been in love. Forgiveness heals everything. Forgiveness. The word made my stomach twist. Then, a few hours later, Gary posted a black and white photo of himself looking out a window like some reflective philosopher. The caption read, "Sometimes two people grow apart because one stops seeing, and the other never felt seen." I wish her peace. Her. As if I were an abstraction, a chapter in his poetic little memoir. My mother shared it. So proud of my brave daughter and her honesty. Janet commented, some people just can't handle the truth. I remember sitting on the couch, staring at the screen, feeling the ground tilt again. They weren't just rewriting history. They were erasing me. For 3 days, I didn't respond. Didn't post, didn't call, didn't explain. Every time my phone buzzed with a pitying text, "Are you okay?" Or, "Wow, didn't know things were so bad between you two," I felt another layer of humiliation peel away from me. The internet had made my pain a public exhibit, and I was too tired to defend myself. Until Roger called. Roger was an old friend from college, quiet, brilliant, the kind of man who could fix anything digital and read people better than most therapists. We'd stayed loosely in touch over the years. He'd seen the posts. "Brenda," he said the moment I picked up. "Are you okay?" It was the first time anyone had asked without judgment or subtext. I opened my mouth, and what came out was barely a whisper. "No." "Good," he said, his voice calm, certain. "That means you're still sane." His steadiness startled me. "Roger, they've turned everyone against me, my family, my friends." "I know, I've seen it." He paused. "Don't engage, don't post, don't explain, just listen." I sat up, clutching the phone. "What do you mean?" "They used Facebook Messenger to talk, right, during the affair?" "During?" The memory surfaced. Gary texting late at night, Cheryl always replying to a friend. "Yes, constantly." That's all I needed to hear. His tone sharpened, efficient, focused. "I'm going to send you an email. Follow the instructions. Don't ask questions, just do it." "Roger, what are you?" "Brenda," he said quietly. "You've spent months letting other people write your story. It's time you took back the pen." And then he hung up. An hour later, his email arrived. Subject: Your archive. A single line of text. "Download your Facebook data. All of it. Message history included. Then call me back." It sounded almost absurd, but something in his confidence anchored me. I followed every step exactly. When the files finished downloading, I sat there, staring at the folder on my desktop. Messages. Zip. Inside it, years of conversations. Every memory, every secret, every betrayal waiting to be opened. For a long moment, my hand hovered over the mouse. Then I double-clicked. The screen filled with lines of text, blue bubbles and gray ones. And there it was, the beginning of the end. Cheryl. He's asleep. She still thinks he's just tired. Gary. She's too boring to ever suspect anything. Cheryl. I almost feel bad. Almost. The words burned. But I kept reading. I read for hours. The cursor blinked at the top of the chat window, like a silent witness, while I scrolled through years of messages, my husband and my sister, dissecting my life like it was a puzzle they'd already solved. Each line was another blade. Gary. She schedules everything, even movie night. It's like living with a spreadsheet. Cheryl. At least her spreadsheets pay for your car. Gary. Don't remind me. She loves playing banker, makes her feel important. I'd loved them both. I'd trusted them both. And they'd bonded over mocking me. But then came the message that turned my stomach to ice. Cheryl. He's so clueless. I've been siphoning money from the joint account for months. I just say it's for groceries or house stuff. Almost have enough for the dream wedding getaway. Can't wait to see Brenda's stupid face when she realizes I took her for everything. There it was, not just betrayal but theft. The account they called household funds? It was my inheritance. The money I'd used to keep the lights on, to fix the roof, to pay for Gary's executive certification classes that helped him get his last promotion. I sat back, breathing through the rage clawing at my throat. The room seemed to shrink, my pulse pounding like a drumbeat under the floorboards. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to her apartment and throw every word she'd written back in her face. But Roger's voice echoed in my mind. Don't engage. Fight with facts. So I fought the only way I could, methodically. I opened my bank statements and printed every one from the past 18 months. Each line item, each ATM withdrawal, each miscellaneous purchase that didn't fit. I highlighted every transaction that matched Cheryl's messages. The total, $10,000, $412.57. $10,000 of my life siphoned away with lies. I wasn't shaking anymore. I was cold and clear. When I finished compiling the documents, I returned to my computer and opened Facebook. Gary's black and white photo still sat there, drenched in false humility. Cheryl's post had gathered hundreds of reactions, hearts, prayers, and nauseating words like bravery and self-love. So I opened a new photo album. Title: The Truth. One by one, I uploaded screenshots, their own messages, the highlighted bank statements, the time-stamped transactions. No commentary, no rant. Just evidence. For the caption, I used one of their own lines. Can't wait to see Brenda's stupid face. Then I clicked post. The moment I did, my hands started trembling. Not from fear, from release. The reaction was immediate. Notifications erupted like fireworks, likes, comments, shares, messages pouring in faster than I could read. At first it was confusion. Then, shock. Then fury, but not at me. Oh my God, Cheryl, what is this? Gary, you're disgusting. So much for your authentic love. She funded your wedding? Are you insane? The tide had turned. Their carefully curated narrative, the victimhood, the poetic sadness crumbled in the span of an hour. I poured myself a glass of wine for the first time in weeks and sat back, watching the digital reckoning unfold. It wasn't vengeance, it was exposure. And the most beautiful part? I hadn't written a single word of commentary. They'd destroyed themselves with their own voices. By midnight, my phone was a storm of notifications. Some were apologies from cousins, friends, even my aunt. Others were messages from people I didn't know, women who wrote things like, "Reading this felt like therapy. Thank you for showing what quiet strength looks like. I wish I'd had your composure when my husband cheated. Oh, you didn't just win, you taught them." I hadn't set out to teach anyone. But maybe the universe sometimes uses our broken pieces as warnings. I finished the last sip of my wine, the taste sharp and clean, and set the glass down on the counter. The house was silent again, but this time, it wasn't suffocating. It was steady, balanced. The war, I realized, was over. Or so I thought. Because when people like Gary and Cheryl lose control, they don't surrender. They flail. They scratch and bite and burn everything within reach before accepting defeat. And by dawn, I'd learned that their final act of desperation was only just beginning. The morning after I posted The Truth, the world outside my window was quiet, unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that hums with aftermath. I sat at the kitchen table, my phone still buzzing on the counter like a living thing. Every few seconds, a new notification appeared. Some were apologies, others pure outrage directed at them. It should have felt like victory. But victory after betrayal is never sweet. It's just stillness, a hollow kind. The kind that comes when your enemies have stopped shooting because they've run out of ammunition. By mid-afternoon, though, I realized Gary and Cheryl weren't done. They'd just gone underground. It started with a phone call from my boss, Mr. Henderson. He asked me to step into his office. His tone was measured, neutral, but I could feel something brewing. When I sat down, he folded his hands, looked at me with that cautious empathy good managers learn to master, and said, "I got a call this morning from a man named Frank Martin, Gary's father, I believe." My stomach sank. "He told me," Henderson continued carefully, "that you've become unstable, that you're harassing his son, spreading lies online, and that your personal problems might be affecting your work." He paused to let the words hang between us. I could almost see Gary's hand guiding this, using his father's respectable voice as a weapon. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. After everything, they still wanted to ruin me professionally, because it was the only territory I had left that they hadn't contaminated. But then Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair and smiled small, knowing. "So I told him," he said, "that I've worked with you for 12 years. That you've been the most professional, reliable person I've ever managed. And that if he ever called this office again with lies about my employee, our legal department would be in touch." It took me a second to process it. Then I exhaled, my throat tight. "Thank you," I whispered. He waved me off gently. "Just keep doing your job, Brenda. You're good at it. Take a few days off if you need them on me." That kindness undid me in a way cruelty never could. I walked out of his office with tears burning behind my eyes, not from sadness, but from sheer relief. A few nights later, I learned that Gary's definition of desperate had reached new lows. At 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from the security app I'd installed after changing the locks. Motion detected front window. My body went cold. I opened the live feed. The grainy infrared image showed Cheryl barefoot, hair disheveled, swaying slightly like she was drunk trying to pry open my living room window with a garden trowel. And behind her, half hidden in the shadows, stood Gary. His posture was frantic, his gestures sharp, urging her to hurry, to be quiet. Through the speaker, I heard her muttering about needing to get her grandmother's pearls, her voice slurred, trembling. Our grandmother's pearls, which, of course, were still around our grandmother's neck in another city. I pressed the panic button on the app. Instantly, the house lights outside flashed, and the alarm screamed into the night. They bolted two figures scattering across the lawn like frightened animals, just as a patrol car turned the corner, its blue lights slicing through the darkness. The police didn't arrest them, but the attempted trespassing report became another piece of evidence for my lawyer's growing file. That was the moment I realized they weren't just cruel. They were unraveling. After that, the harassment came in waves, small, pathetic attempts to sting me back. Gary told mutual acquaintances I had a gambling problem. Cheryl told my cousin I'd killed her childhood hamster. They made up stories faster than anyone could debunk them. But the more they spoke, the more people saw what I already knew. Two drowning people, grasping at shadows, choking on their own lies. Then came the final insult, an unexpected phone call from Gary's mother, Dolores. Her voice was syrupy, the kind of sweetness that coats the knife before it slides in. "Oh, Brenda dear, I just wanted to talk. This whole situation has been such a tragedy, hasn't it?" I didn't respond. I'd learned silence was stronger than argument. She went on, her tone shifting into persuasion. "You know, marriage is sacred. Everyone makes mistakes. Gary's under so much pressure. This divorce, it's going to destroy him. Maybe you could ease up a little? Let him come home, work things out?" I almost laughed. "You're asking me to take him back? After what he's done?" "Well," she said, with a sigh. "When you say it like that, it sounds harsh. He's a good man, Brenda. He just lost his way for a bit. And that poor girl, Cheryl, she's barely surviving. She can't support him. He's not meant to struggle like this." There it was. The mask of civility cracking just enough to show the contempt beneath it. "So," I said, my voice cold, "you want me to take back your cheating son because it would be financially convenient for him?" Dolores sniffed. "You don't have to be so crass about it. You always had a mean streak, Brenda. I thought you were better than that." That was her parting shot. And that was the moment I knew I was truly finished, done trying to make anyone understand, done justifying my survival. When the call ended, I blocked her number, then I blocked my mother, and Janet. The noise stopped. And in the stillness that followed, I realized I no longer cared what they said. They were small, desperate people screaming into the void they'd created. I, on the other hand, had already moved past the wreckage. There was still one final battle ahead, yes, but it wouldn't be fought in the shadows or online. It would be fought under fluorescent lights, before a judge, where truth had weight and lies had consequences. And I was ready. The courthouse smelled like old wood and cold air. It's funny the details your mind holds onto when your whole life is about to be dissected, like the faint scent of floor polish, or how the marble steps echoed under your heels just a little too loudly. I wasn't nervous. I was tired. Tired of chaos, tired of gossip, tired of being twisted into the villain of a story I hadn't written. I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere official, stamped, signed, undeniable. My lawyer, Margaret, met me in the hallway. She was everything Gary's lawyer wasn't: calm, sharp, quietly terrifying. Her tailored suit looked like armor, and when she smiled at me, it wasn't the kind of smile meant to soothe. It was the kind that said, "They're not ready for what's coming." She squeezed my arm. "Deep breaths, Brenda. Let them talk first. They'll hang themselves faster that way." And she was right. Gary and Cheryl were already seated at the opposing table when we walked in. They looked nothing like the smug pair from the Vegas chapel photo. Gary's expensive suit didn't quite fit anymore, and Cheryl's face was pale, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness. Their lawyer, a man with slicked-back hair and too much confidence, smiled at me like I was a nuisance to be brushed away. I sat down, folded my hands, and waited. The bailiff called for order. The judge, Judge Alani, a woman with eyes sharp enough to cut marble, took her seat. Gary's lawyer began his speech. He painted Gary as a good man who had suffered from depression, a husband who'd made a tragic mistake while in a vulnerable state. He called Cheryl a kind-hearted woman who offered comfort in a moment of weakness. He actually said those words, a moment of weakness. An 18-month affair, a stolen marriage certificate, a stolen bank account, but sure, just a moment of weakness. He went on to say I was controlling, obsessed with money, emotionally unavailable. The same tired story they'd spun online, now recycled for the courtroom. Margaret let him finish. Then she stood. Her voice sliced through the room like clean glass. Your Honor, what my client's husband calls a moment of weakness is in fact an 8-month-long calculated betrayal. We are not here to discuss emotions, we are here to discuss evidence. She lifted a heavy binder from her briefcase and set it on the table with a satisfying thud. In this binder, she continued, are unedited transcripts of Mr. Martin's and Miss Evans's private messages, financial records proving theft of marital funds, and photographic evidence of their fraudulent marriage conducted while still legally Wednesday. Gary's lawyer shot up. Objection! Private correspondence is inadmissible. Margaret didn't even blink. The messages were exchanged over a shared family data plan paid for by my client. There is no expectation of privacy. The judge's lips curved into a small, dangerous smile. Objection overruled. Proceed, counselor. Margaret opened the binder and read aloud. Each quote was another nail in the coffin. The mocking comments, the money siphoned under the pretense of groceries, the gloating about their dream wedding getaway. Gary's face turned the color of wet paper. Cheryl began to cry softly into a tissue. Their lawyer stared at his notepad as if wishing it would open up and swallow him whole. And then Margaret delivered the finishing blow. On May 12th, she said, Mr. Martin wrote to Miss Evans, and I quote, "Can't wait to see Brenda's stupid face when she realizes I took her for everything." The entire courtroom gasped. The judge removed her glasses and looked at Gary directly. Mr. Martin, she said, her voice calm but lethal. In what context was that meant to be funny? Gary stammered. It was a joke. Out of context. A joke, she repeated, her tone now glacial. You were mocking the woman who built your home, paid your bills, and trusted you implicitly. You call that humor? He opened his mouth again, but no sound came. The judge leaned back, folded her hands, and exhaled through her nose. In all my years, I have seen many forms of cruelty, but rarely have I seen it documented so thoroughly. I watched Gary sink into his chair, deflated. Cheryl kept her face hidden behind trembling fingers. When the judge finally spoke again, her words were quiet but firm. I have everything I need to make a ruling on spousal support and property allocation. This will not take long. Her verdict was swift, merciless, and beautifully simple. The house mine, free and clear. Every account and asset in my name untouched. Every cent Gary had tried to claim dismissed. And then, like the universe itself couldn't resist a little poetic justice, she added, the court recognizes Miss Martin as the primary financial provider for the duration of the marriage. Therefore, Mr. Martin will pay rehabilitative alimony $500 per month for 1 year to the spouse he defrauded. You could have heard a pin drop. Gary's lawyer turned crimson. Cheryl made a strangled sound, half sob, half gasp. And me? I just breathed. For the first time in months, I breathed fully. The gavel hit the wood. Case closed. Margaret turned to me, her expression softening. Told you, she said quietly. They hang themselves every time. And she was right. All I had to do was tell the truth and let it do the burning for me. When the gavel came down, it didn't sound like victory. It sounded like release. Sharp. Final. A clean slice through years of rot. I gathered my papers, nodded my thanks to the judge, and followed Margaret into the hallway. The noise of the courthouse, heels clacking, voices echoing, doors slamming felt like the world resuming after a long pause. Margaret handed me a copy of the ruling, neat and official, embossed with the seal of justice. "Frame it," she said dryly. "Or burn it. Either way, it's yours." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. Then we stepped outside. The air outside was bright and biting. And waiting at the bottom of the courthouse steps was the last scene of the play, the people who'd spent months turning my life into theater. My mother, Eleanor, stood rigid beside the car, her lips pressed thin with fury. Dolores, Gary's mother, hovered close by, clutching her pearls like a prop from some tragic opera. Janet stood between them, rolling her eyes, arms crossed like she'd rather be anywhere else. And Cheryl looked like she'd aged 10 years in a month, pale, drained, small. I felt Margaret slow beside me. "Do you want to wait until they leave?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. "Let's finish it." My mother reached me first. Her voice was sharp enough to draw blood. "How could you do this, Brenda?" she hissed, loud enough for passers-by to stare. "You left your sister with nothing. You're a cold, vengeful woman. I raised you better than this." I opened my mouth to respond, but Dolores beat me to it. Her voice rose in shrill defense. Your daughter? Your daughter destroyed my son. She lured him into a marriage and then humiliated him in court. He's ruined all because your other daughter couldn't keep her husband happy." My mother gasped. "Excuse me? Your son seduced my youngest child." Within seconds, it devolved into chaos, a shouting match of mothers, each trying to rewrite their own shame. Janet jumped in, rolling her eyes. "You're all delusional. This entire family is pathetic." Dolores snapped back. "At least we have money, dear." Janet threw her half-empty water bottle, missed, and hit our mother's hair instead. That was when it happened, the complete, absurd unraveling of them all. Eleanor shrieked, shoving Janet. Janet stumbled into Cheryl, who tried to catch herself but tripped on the curb. The whole scene exploded in a mess of screaming and flailing arms. Phones came out. Bystanders stopped to watch. Someone muttered, "Is this being filmed?" And in the center of it, my family, the people who'd once lectured me about dignity, turned into a public spectacle. I didn't say a word. I didn't move. I just stood on the courthouse steps and watched them burn their own stage down. When the security guards finally intervened, I turned to Margaret. She looked at me with a small, incredulous smile. "And they say lawyers are dramatic." That made me laugh again, not bitterly this time, but freely, fully. The kind of laugh that comes when something inside you finally lets go. As the shouting faded behind us, we walked to her car. I glanced back one last time. My mother was still screaming. Dolores was pointing. Janet was stalking off in disgust. Cheryl sat on the curb, sobbing into her hands, whispering something that looked a lot like "this wasn't supposed to happen." And maybe, for a fleeting second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But sympathy doesn't belong in the ruins of your own peace. Driving away, I rolled down the window and let the cold wind hit my face. It carried away the sound of them, the noise, the guilt, the past. The courthouse disappeared in the rearview mirror. Ahead of me was open road, clear and sunlit. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's wife, or daughter, or sister. I just felt like me. Free. Unknown. Untethered. I had no idea what came next, only that it would be mine. In the weeks after the hearing, silence became my closest friend. Not the brittle kind that echoes after a fight, but the deep, grounded quiet of peace, finally returning to its rightful place. The house that had once felt like a fortress began to change. It was too big now, too full of ghosts. Every corner held an echo. Gary's forgotten socks under the bed, a photo album that made my chest ache, the scent of a life I didn't want anymore. So, one crisp morning, I called a real estate agent. 2 months later, a sold sign stood proudly in the front yard. I remember locking the door for the last time, my reflection faint in the glass. I whispered, "Thank you for sheltering me, but I'm done hiding." And I walked away without looking back. With the profit from the sale, plus my inheritance, I bought a small condo downtown, modern, bright, half the size, but twice as alive. No shared closets. No muted beige tones. No compromises. The first thing I bought was a yellow sofa. Gary would have hated it too loud, too cheerful. That's exactly why I chose it. Then I filled the place with light, books, plants, and the sound of my favorite jazz station drifting through open windows. Every morning I'd make coffee, step onto the balcony, and let the sun spill over my skin. No one interrupted, no one demanded, no one diminished me. Just me breathing, healing, existing freely. Over time, the ache softened. The anger dulled. I started going to the gym again, not to punish myself, but to remember how strength feels from the inside out. I reconnected with old friends, the ones I'd pushed aside while trying to hold a collapsing marriage together. Carol, my dearest friend, hugged me so tightly at our first lunch back that I nearly cried into her shoulder. She listened as I told her everything, the text, the affair, the courtroom, the chaos. When I finished, she shook her head. Brenda, you didn't lose a husband, you shed a parasite. And I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my wine. That's when I realized something. Laughter can be a form of forgiveness, not for them, but for yourself. It was around that time that I met Frank. It started simply enough Saturday morning spin class. He was always early, always smiling, with the kind of quiet presence that made everyone else seem louder by comparison. One day after class, he offered to buy me coffee. We sat by the window of a little cafe, steam fogging the glass as rain tapped softly against it. He asked about my work, my hobbies, my favorite books. He didn't pry into the past, he was just curious about me. When he finally did ask, months later, I told him everything, not to seek sympathy, but to see if he could handle the truth. He listened silently, eyes steady, hands folded. When I finished, he took a sip of coffee and said, "Well, that tells me two things. One, you're tougher than a $2 steak, and two, I'm very, very glad I'm not Gary." I burst out laughing. The real kind, the kind that shakes something loose inside you. We've been taking it slow ever since. No grand promises, no rush to label it. Just two people walking side by side, building something gentle and real. Sometimes he brings me coffee from that same cafe. On the cup, the barista always writes, "Frank's favorite Brenda." It's silly, but every time I see it, it makes my heart feel full. A few months later, I visited Margaret's office to update my will. On the wall behind her desk hung a framed copy of Gary and Cheryl's Vegas marriage certificate, the one that had blown up their perfect little fantasy. I raised an eyebrow. "Still keeping souvenirs?" She grinned. "I like reminders of poetic justice." We laughed, the kind of easy laughter that comes from two women who've both seen the fire and walked through it. As I left her office, I thought about everything that had happened. Every betrayal, every sleepless night, every time I'd thought the world was ending. It hadn't been the end. It had been a cleansing. Now, when people ask me if I believe in forgiveness, I tell them this. Yes, but not the kind where you excuse what was done to you. The kind where you free yourself from ever needing an apology. Because the truth is, I didn't just change the locks on my house that night in October. I changed the locks on my soul. And the woman who emerged from that silence calm, strong, self-made, she doesn't wait for anyone to come home. She is home. I didn't get the life I planned. But I got something better, a life that's completely unapologetically mine. And it is beautiful.